Let's look at consumer complaints now. I love a good complaint and I get all hot and bothered about it, and then when I get to actually doing something about it, of course that hot and botheredness disappears suddenly because I get all scared. Let's talk about how we do it now. The Office of the Consumer Goods Service Ombudsman has been established to provide guidelines for the consumer goods and services industry on the minimum conduct standards expected when engaging with consumers. And the former Ombudsman of the Banking Services, Advocate Neville Melville, has been appointed as the Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman, and he's in the studio in Johannesburg now. Neville, congratulations on your appointment, first of all. Tell us about the complaints landscape in South Africa. Do we complain enough?
Yes, I think people certainly complain, but whether they complain effectively is another question. And as you yourself said, sometimes the people with the legitimate complaints are the people who lose interest and fall by the wayside, and sometimes the complaints that we end up with are those that are really not grounded in the law or anything else, and some people will go right through the whole system until they get what they believe is what they're looking for.
So just making a nuisance of themselves. But when I said, do we complain enough? Give us a sort of idea of the volume of complaints that are dealt with on a yearly basis.
Well, certainly our office is not receiving very high numbers as yet because we're just newly formed. I was only appointed 3 months ago. The office was launched officially 6 months ago, and at that time we've received just under 1,000 complaints, of which we've managed to finalise about 90% of so far.
And the nature of the complaints, I can't imagine that it would be specifically aimed at one industry or one sector of the economy. I imagine financial services, for example, might be one that receives some attention.
Right. Our area of specialisation is actually in terms of the retail industry and anything that feeds into that. So we deal with the manufacturers, anyone who's involved in logistics, packaging, etc. So as a result of that, about 50% of the complaints that we get relate to either furniture or white goods or computers, cell phones, etc.
Yeah. Sorry, Neville, we lost the communications for us. Resolve a complaint. Can you tell us from A to Z how it actually works?
Yes, certainly. What we encourage is someone to first of all go to the supplier, and preferably the centralised complaint handling section. But what normally happens is someone arrives at us, we'll then refer them through to the appropriate person through our call centre, and most of the complaints are actually resolved at that level. Some will then escalate back to us, and those that escalate, what we'll do is we will actually, if necessary, investigate, and in some instances we'll send them to a third party, an independent third party, to mediate, or we will ourselves come up with some sort of facilitated settlement, or we'll make a recommendation ultimately as to how the party should settle their complaint.
Do you find that the consumer eventually gets a little bit bewildered and actually doesn't know where to start? I mean, programs like this is obviously going to raise awareness, but in general, do people know how to go about things?
No, I think there is a problem, and also there's quite a number of different options available to consumers, which on the one hand is a good thing, but on the other hand, as you mentioned, does cause some confusion. So certainly, as I've indicated, should start with the supplier, and then the next level up is if there is an ombudsman like ourselves, or the banking ombudsman, motor ombudsman, so forth, they should then go to the ombudsman before going to the commission, which should really be the last resort, and they should really be dealing with the regulatory issues.
We've been focusing very much on the consumer that says, look, my cell phone doesn't work, or my sofa's just broken when I sat on it.
Right.
But what about protecting the people that are providing the goods and services? Because often there could be some mischief making from consumers.
Yes, certainly. There have been cases where we've had question marks and so forth, but I think it's a lot easier for the suppliers to keep the necessary information and so forth to protect themselves under those instances. So we are not consumer advocates as such, and nor are we there to defend the suppliers. So we look at everything from a neutral standpoint, and we see where the facts take us.
You take this very seriously, Neville, I know, because you've written a book. I think it's in its second edition at the moment. Right. I think it's called the Consumer Protection Act Made Easy, something like that. Yes. Is this, how far behind are we with the rest of the world in making consumers aware? I mean, books like yours, of course, do help, but are we a little bit backward in coming forward?
Look, I think we certainly are quite advanced as far as the legislative platform is concerned, but we really are struggling as far as keeping people aware of their rights. And I think a lot of the problem is that much of the population is far from all the infrastructures and so forth. And for instance, most of the people who deal with us only have access to a cell phone. We can't send them something by fax or email or whatever the case may be, so it's very difficult.
The CPA, the Consumer Protection Act, came in on a rather unfortunate day, April the 1st, 2011. Since then, have we made strides?
Yes, I think so. Certainly we find that with most of the big suppliers, if they're not in line with what they're supposed to be doing, certainly at a centralized point, they do what's necessary. I think the real challenge is with the smaller suppliers who don't have such a reputational risk, or at least don't believe they have, and I think they're more inclined to say take it or leave it.
Yeah, indeed. And do they do that? And if they do, then do people give up? I'm just trying to get to the bottom of how assiduous we are and how seriously we take all this.
Yeah, look, I think it'll depend to some extent on how big a purchase it is. So certainly when we're talking about furniture, even if it's 3,000 or 4,000 rand or something like that, that's going to be a big chunk out of someone in the lower LSM's income. So they're certainly going to be very keen to pursue that. Whereas someone who has more income, and if it's just a kettle or something like that, they may shrug their shoulders and go on with life.
Neville, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for your valuable time this morning. That's Neville Melville, Ombudsman at Consumer Goods and Services Ombudsman.